widely acknowledged among critics that Brideshead Revisited, which is at once romantic and eschatological, is a narrative of protagonist Charles Ryder's soul in the process of conversion to Catholicism. As Dominic Manganiello suggests, the novel tells conversion in terms of maturation. It is Charles's, quote, spiritual odyssey, unquote. Furthermore, Douglas Lane Beatty rightly notes a connection between love and Charles's conversion, because the character, quote, follows a path from lesser loves to greater, from human loves to God, unquote. Charles's transforming loves are catalysts for the immense spiritual changes he undergoes throughout the course of the novel. It is by tracing Charles's movement from one love to another that we come to an understanding of his emergent spiritual literacy in the text. For according to the Catholicism of Waugh, and eventually Charles, spiritual maturation and even self-denial qua conversion are at the heart of self-giving human and divine love. I'll begin by establishing a definition of what I mean by spiritual literacy. Most think of literacy in terms of reading and writing, yet as David Barton points out, the term is being expanded so that it can be used in disciplines other than rhetoric and composition. My use of spiritual literacy involves the ability to articulate and properly respond to the ontological and eschatological questions of one's soul. Thus, spiritual literacy is concerned with the inner workings of the soul, and even the interior dialogue of the individual as he or she mediates the world. In other words, the soul is a text, although not a written one, and it is meant to be read. Change within the individual through spiritual conversion is indeed one of the novel's crucial themes, as well as a means for the extension of the critical discussion toward one of literacy. No critique is considering Waugh's deeply Catholic conversion story as a narrative of spiritual literacy. I seek to fill this gap by analyzing Charles's spiritual maturation within the framework of literacy. In the interest of time, I'll jump to the second half of the text, when Charles is well on his way toward converting to Catholicism. But as his relationship suggests, even at that time, his spirituality remains markedly immature, an idea Waugh intimates by pointing toward his lesser worldly loves, Sebastian and Julia Flight. It is clear that Charles considers his relationship with Sebastian to be his access point for a relationship with God, when referring to their insufficient romance at Brideshead, the Flight's family estate. He remarks, quote, perhaps the beatific vision itself has some kinship with this lowly experience. I, at any rate, believed myself very near heaven at Brideshead, unquote. Furthermore, he finds great difficulty understanding Sebastian's Catholic spirituality early on in their romance. Quote, his faith was an enigma to me at that time. I had no religion, unquote. Despite the failure of Sebastian and Charles's relationship to fulfill the protagonist, both of the Flights generate Charles's spiritual literacy development. For instance, when Charles admits that Sebastian was only his forerunner, and Julia suggests that she might be only such too, he privately agrees and wonders if, quote, all our loves are merely hints and symbols. Perhaps you and I are each straining through and beyond the other, unquote. Here we witness what literacy scholar Walter J. Ong calls consciousness raising, as Charles's consciousness of God increases when his awareness about the nature of his lesser loves surfaces. What's more, this passage shows how his emerging spiritual literacy helps him better articulate the lack in his worldly loves. Charles's spiritual literacy reaches a milestone at the novel's climax, the deathbed conversion of Lord Marchmain, Sebastian and Julia's father. In this scene, Waugh provides a verbal marker pinpointing our hero's spiritual development in interior prayer. During the last few days of Lord Marchmain's life, Charles tries and fails to prevent him from receiving absolution. So Charles utters what readers are to understand as his first prayer ever. Quote, O God, if there is a God, forgive him his sins, if there is such a thing as sin. Unquote. Charles's supplication, although hesitant and unbelieving, demonstrates that he is destroying piecemeal the self-imposed wall between himself and God. Despite his obvious reluctance as he composes this personal prayer, from it one can logically infer that Charles's soul is approaching God. Beatty also recognizes a widening chink in Charles's previously resilient armor of agnosticism. As he writes, quote, all Charles's memories culminate in the scene of Lord Marchmain's death, the moment which, through the operations of an ironic providence as yet unrecognized by him, Ryder's whole life has been tending, and which precipitates his conversion to Catholicism, unquote. And out of love for Julia, Charles offers a more self-surrendering prayer than the first, a sure sign not only that his conversion is drawing near, but also that he accesses spiritual literacy through Julia. Until the end of the story, Juliet is vastly more spiritually literate than Charles. It is she who most clearly recognizes a deficiency in their romance. Quote, Julia spoke and said sadly, "How many more wasted days? I want a day with you of real peace." Unquote. Charles is perplexed by Julia's pronunciation because Julia is more aware than he of divine love making itself known in their swiftly deteriorating dalliance. As she says, quote, "I feel the past and future pressing so hard on either side that there's no room for the present at all." Unquote. The past and present she refers to can be interpreted as her younger days as a devout Catholic and her renewed fervor in her faith, which she accurately anticipates. The second verbal marker of Charles's maturing spiritual literacy relates to an atypical sort of love scene between him and Julia at the end of the text. After her father's conversion, Julia ends their relationship because she cannot, quote, live in sin, unquote, because they are still married, albeit divorced from the church's perspective. Terence Wright aptly describes the motivation behind Julia's decision in Waugh's terms. Quote, "She refuses to set up a rival good to God's, and she places her love of God ahead of her love of Charles." Unquote. Charles's response, that he had been expecting her to end it, is an unmistakable sign that his spiritual literacy is developing nicely. He can now understand, or read, Julia's spirituality as a text. Not only is he literate in this regard, the next thing he says is an even clearer indication of his maturity. Quote, "I don't want to make it any easier for you. I hope your heart may break, but I do understand." Unquote. That he understands why Julia is breaking up with him, the great love of her life, demonstrates his long-coming embrace of Catholic spirituality. Furthermore, his empathy suggests that he is willing to let Julia go for the sake of his own spiritual well-being. Charles is finally capable of coming up with just the right words when he must speak of his love for others. He is making a sacrifice which took a lifetime of unfulfilling loves, first Sebastian, then his wife Celia, and then Julia, to reach divine love. Therefore, Julia's statement that she can't shut herself out from God's mercy relates to Charles because he reaches a new level of spiritual literacy when he lets Julia go. Spiritual literacy, therefore, not only entails an understanding of divine love, but also a willingness to live out that love within one's human relationships. Both Charles's interior prayer and his response to Julia when she ends their relationship work like speech acts as he matures spiritually. When he confides in Julia that he at last understands the pull she feels toward God's love, Charles surrenders himself to it along with her. Waugh connects Charles's words with the movement toward God immediately after Charles's speech act. Quote, "The avalanche was down, the hillside swept bare behind it, the new mound glittered." Unquote. The new mound glitters because it is fresh, like Charles's Catholicism, and the avalanche just passed and the hillside swept bare so that Charles can pass from himself to God. As I hope I have shown, the confluence of literacy and spirituality is a clear indication that religious conversion entails maturity vis-a-vis literacy. This progression in spiritual literacy is relative to the intellectual sophistication that increases as the individual's aptitude for reading and writing expands. By tracking changes in Charles's thinking throughout Brideshead Revisited, readers come to a fuller understanding of how conversion stories relate to literacy narratives.